want to bring in now Gianno Caldwell, Fox News political analyst, and I start off with the caveat, as I always do in these breaking news situations, Gianno, if we need to go back, if this New Jersey Democrat senator says he's running again after 50 years in office, we'll go right back to it.
Yes.
How does this play politically? And you know what? This isn't the only time he's been indicted. 3 times in 20 years. Of course he's going to do what he wants. He probably figures he's done it before. He can get away with talking now.
Exactly right. He's been emboldened, Harris. And I got to tell you, this has created a political disaster for President Joe Biden and Democrats who've been crusaders against Donald Trump with his indictments and gone on the record multiple times over and over again. But yet we have yet to hear anything from the White House. Now, keep in mind, with this particular indictment, it was also reported that Menendez went to Joe Biden asking to have the U.S. attorney appointed who he believed that he could influence to get around these issues. President Biden should speak to that. He absolutely should speak to that. He should come out with a very strong worded statement or have a press conference asking him to resign, because that is the right thing to do. I don't think that people are buying what he just tried to sell the American people. It's a rotten apple and no one's biting, Harris.
You know, it made me cringe a little bit to think that the president might have to defend this at a podium, much like Menendez. I don't know how well that could go for the president. This is high wire stuff, and he's struggled as of late. And I don't say that lightly. It's just misery to see a president not be able to get up there and do what he needs to do, no matter what your politics. What I will say about this particular thing, and I started off the hour, if this is not an argument for term limits. If a guy can come up 3 times with these types of charges and then they continue to get worse and more serious over time, this is like the poster child right now, what we're watching. He won't step away permanently, but he says, I'm not going to be chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee right now. I won't be that, but that's only temporary, so on and so forth. I mean, we're talking the height of political privilege here.
Absolutely. And then the idea that, well, maybe if Democrats want to push me out the way, I'll run as something else, independent Republican. That's just not going to fly. People are fed up with corruption. We see it with the polling, even with Joe Biden, how many Americans believe that he's corrupt. They've created a stain on their party. If they do not speak out loudly and vocally, telling him 3 times is a charm, you need to get out of office. If they don't do that, then they're in more serious trouble than what we've seen in this polling this past year, Harris.
You know, through voters' voices on this hour of television, I really like to hear from the people and know what they're thinking. I live in New Jersey, so since Friday, I mean, every place I went, this is what people were talking about, and NFL football, of course. But what they're saying about him is, but they knew, but he kept promising all of these things, and so voters vote for him anyway. And we see this all over the country. Your former home city of Chicago, as bad as it's gotten with crime, they put in a very liberal mayor who's just gonna really court that soft on crime policy. I mean, we've seen it.
That's right. That's right. Mayor Brandon Johnson, overall crime is up almost 30% since he's taken office. And you know what's interesting here is tomorrow I'll be testifying before Congress. They're doing a field hearing in Chicago, downtown Chicago. And I'm all set and ready to go. And I get a call on Friday saying that the Democrats have pulled out, especially since my name was published. So I'm not sure.
They won't be at the hearing?
They will not be there. And you would think that they will want to be there. They've been screaming Black Lives Matter. Well, in the city of Chicago, just this past year, 80% of the people who were murdered were Black. So how dare you not show up for the people you claim to care about? Or is it only the Black votes that you care about? They should really be ashamed of themselves. And I tell you, Congressman Jerry Nadler is the ranking member on Judiciary. I tried to speak to him last year. We got it on tape. It's on foxnews.com. People can go look at it if you like. I said, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about violent crime. What are your solutions? I talked to Democrats and Republicans alike on that topic. Democrats didn't really want to speak to me. And it's really discouraging, I think, for African Americans who wholeheartedly support the Democratic Party. I know they've lost a tremendous amount of support among Black people, but it's disheartening to see that these guys are going to turn their backs on the folks that they claim to care about the most. It is unacceptable, and I am really upset about it, Harris. I got to be honest.
Gianno, I know the loss of your brother in recent times in the last year, Christian. God bless him, your little brother. And I know how personal this is for you. But you're also talking in a big umbrella fashion about Democrats not coming to a hearing as crime is cracking in some Democrat-led cities across this nation. And it's breaking the citizenship. And when you talk about pushing back, you need elected officials that will come to the table and hear, listen, and speak to the future and making things better. That's what this day is about with Senator Bob Menendez. If anybody thought that this was going to be about anything other than him and him defending himself, the lawyers that I've had on this hour have said that would not be a good idea. Don't put out sealed testimony at a news conference. But they felt like he did that anyway. Now, and I want to check in with my team. Is he still translating from English everything that he said? Okay. And now he's leaving. And no questions. And I'm going to ask my executive producer, in all that time, did he say it in Spanish that he was going to run again? He didn't say it in English. Yeah, we're going to double check that. So what we were told, this was supposed to be billed, and Gianno, stay with me for this. I'm going to bring in Jason Chaffetz, Fox News contributor and former Utah congressman, along with Scott Bolden, former Washington, D.C. Democratic Party chair. We're going to stay with the politics of this for just the moment. Senator Bob Menendez is facing very serious charges. And the receipts that prosecutors say that they have include gold bars, more than $500,000 in cash that were found around their home, he and his wife, she's indicted too, some stuffed into clothes, including a jacket that had his name across it, and some kind of dealings with Egyptian officials inside that country, and that in the indictment, his wife brought those meetings to bear between her husband, a sitting senator, and chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and those Egyptian officials. I mean, it is glaringly obvious that he's in some hot water at this point. What we were told is that this would just simply be a statement about him wanting to run again. He's not going anywhere. That's a quote from him. I'm not going anywhere. This turned out to be him trying to defend some of that. It was a little bit like light testimony, maybe a little heavy at times. Yeah. Gianno, I come back to you just to talk about the politics of the moment. Those voters in New Jersey, what are they getting today out of their senior senator?
Well, what they're getting is what they've seen in the past, another indictment to this senator. And I think voters have to ask themselves a question. If you've been indicted 3 times on corruption, and there seemingly was some evidence of that, we see in the gold bars, we see in the money. I mean, you got to wonder, is this guy corrupt? I mean, I would think like, wow, after 3 times for this kind of indictment, that something must be going on here. The fact that he continues to get himself in this hot water time and time again shows that he's been truly emboldened. He believes he can't be caught. Not only that, you have a Democratic Party who's in control of the White House and who's in control of the Justice Department. Maybe he felt that he had some protection there. And as I mentioned previously, he went to Joe Biden and said, hey, I want to have this particular person assigned as the district, not the district attorney, but the federal prosecutor,
the U.S.
in
attorney
in my home state. Yeah, the U.S. attorney. Thank you so much. The U.S. attorney, because he believed he can influence this individual. Who knows what else may be in his closet that we just don't know about? What we just seen. Go ahead.
The reporting on that in New Jersey over the weekend and that particular U.S. attorney is something that everybody should read. I'm going to put it up in my social feeds today so that people can really dig in on that and see if what you're calling for, the President of the United States, whether or not he needs to come out today and address that forthwith. Were those conversations happening? And did he help that situation? Did he have knowledge? Yeah, I think you may be right about that. Meanwhile, Here he is, Bob Menendez, talking about the money that was found in places in the home that he and his wife Nadine own. And remember, she's indicted too. Let's watch.
Now, this may seem old-fashioned, but these were monies drawn from my personal savings account based on the income that I have lawfully derived over those 30 years.
Jason Chaffetz, I'm going to ask you to come in and join Gianno and me if you can, and Phil Holloway as well. Jason, is it old-fashioned to keep $500,000 in your clothes?
Yeah, that's a little suspicious. It's striking that he would do that because it's so easy to demonstrate whether that happened or not.
Well,
but
they
I
have
think
pictures
one of
of
the
it,
key
I would
factors
imagine.
here. Yeah, they have pictures of it, but they're going to have all sorts of banking records and whatnot at a $174,000 annual income that he's had for a long period of time. I don't know that you can get from here to there simply by those numbers. It's also striking is after the last indictment, they went through the trial and it was a hung jury. But the Senate Ethics Committee, which is bipartisan, equal numbers of of Democrats and Republicans, they severely admonished the senator, and they said that he needed to provide restitution by providing the money back and reimbursing for those expenses that he had taken, private airplane rides and these types of things. So what did the senator do there? And it's a sad state of the United States Senate by the fact that you have a severely admonished senator and they allow him to be the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee.
Yeah.
How does Chuck Schumer do that? How does he do that? And so I think it's also striking that we're supposed to get a re-election announcement and he didn't make that.
Well, look, he needed to testify. I want to bring in just very quickly Phil Holloway. What's he facing in terms of prison or anything? And we only have a few seconds here.
You read my mind, Harris. It's about 45 years maximum. Now, if he goes to trial and he's convicted after a jury trial, the judge is going to take in all of this, hubris is what I would call it, and his lack of acceptance of responsibility. And he may very well never breathe free air again in the event he's convicted by a jury and has to face sentencing by a federal judge. These charges carry major time, and the sentencing guidelines don't give him room.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.